my name is Jasmine. Today's topic is about budgeting. I'll go through why budgeting is important, different philosophies on budgeting, how to start your first budget, and what you should do after you have your budget. There are 4 big reasons of why budgeting is important. First, you have to make sure you're always allocating for your goals. It's important to always have money for the things you need and the things that are important to you. Budgeting also allows you to feel free from money. Many people lose sleep over financial issues, and having a budget will help you get that sleep. The third reason is that it sheds light on bad spending habits. And last but not least, it helps you reach your financial goals, be it saving up for an emergency or to get or stay out of debt. Moving on to different philosophies of budgeting. The first one, or the one that I personally use, is zero-based budgeting. This means that every dollar has a job. Basically, at the end of the month, every single dollar should have its own purpose. So you allocate all of your dollars to different categories. This can help you be prepared for unexpected circumstances. If you know that you have car maintenance fees like every other month, that shouldn't really be coming from an emergency savings that you're saving up for. At that point, why not make a separate category? An emergency savings should only be used for a true emergency, like an unexpected medical bill, or your house burns down. Here's a quick plug to go and watch my health insurance video where I talk about all the terminology in health insurance. For zero-based budgeting, if I make $2,000 a month and I spend $800 of it on rent, then I have $1,200 for savings, my wants, and also food, car payment, etc. But basically, at the end of the month, I want to be at $0 where all the money is in a specific category and I will end up using it. Savings is also incorporated in zero-based budgeting if you add that into your categories. That money has its own job. So at the end of the month, that $2,000 needs to be allocated to every single category that I have and that I value. The next philosophy, which was made popular by Senator Elizabeth Warren, is the 50-30-20 rule, where 50% of the money you earn goes towards necessities, 30% goes towards wants, and 20% goes towards savings. Some things that are categorized as needs include mortgage or rent payments, healthcare, food for sure, and minimum debt payments. Wants are basically things that you can live without, so dining out money or like fun money, Netflix, Spotify subscriptions, those types of things. The last 20% should go towards savings, which includes things like investment, saving for emergency fund, saving for medium and long-term goals such as marriage and ultimately retirement, and also the rest of your debt payment. So to build a budget off of this, you look at your income and also your needs and you build off of it. Ultimately, the goal is to lower the percentage of your needs and your wants and increase the percentage of your savings. So if I make $2,000 a month, then for my needs, I should only have $1,000 a month. This includes things like rent payment, car payment, and groceries. From here, I think about how much I can spend on rent, given that I only have $1,000 out of my $2,000 per month. Basically, those types of thoughts. When it comes to starting your first budget, I would say that there are 5 major steps. If you already have your first budget, don't worry, you can jump to the next chapter. The first one is to evaluate your goals and your values. From there, you figure out your income, and then you go and figure out your expenses for the last few months. With expenses, you categorize each of them as either fixed or variable expenses. The last step is to figure out income minus goals minus expenses. The first step, goals and values. Figure out your long, medium, and short-term goals. Some questions I would ask myself if I was starting my budget from scratch again is, do I want to retire? When do I want to retire? Do I want to get married? How much will I need for marriage? Do I want to buy a house? Where in the world do I want my house to be? How much are housing costs over there? Do I need to save up for an emergency? Some of these goals could be things that could help you increase your net worth in the future, be it through career, education, or starting your own business. And the second part of this first step is your values. A good guiding question here is, what do I want my money to do? What matters to you? Do you want to donate? Do you want to pay for your brother or sister's education, like their college education? The next step is your income. Figure out how much money you're making from your main job, your side gig, etc. I generally don't include investments or interest here since I'm not going to use it in my immediate future. If you are using your investments or interest, then I would try to not do that unless it's for its intended purpose. Spending money on clothes does not count as an emergency. Although I do wish I could spend my entire emergency savings on clothes, but obviously it's not fiscally responsible to do that. Next thing, expenses. This is where the clothes are. List down everything that you spend your money on. With this, you figure out what your monthly expenses are, so your student loans or your rent payment, your groceries, your eating out bills, etc. Basically, how much are you spending per month on different categories? If you're not using any app or spreadsheet to keep track of what you're spending on, it helps to go through your bank statements these past months. With whichever vehicle of tracking you have, figure out how much you spent in the past few months and take the average. It does help to actually look at the average for each category for the past few months because some months are different than others, and some categories only happen once or twice a year. That allows you to prepare for things like Black Friday, Christmas, Lunar New Year, birthdays, etc. Are there any other recurring expenses that don't happen every month? Those should ultimately be factored in too. If the past few months is too much for you to do, I would say take the total for each category for 1 month. And when you're looking at your vehicle for tracking expenses, don't be afraid to say, it's okay, I spent blank on blank and it only happens once a year. We just need to factor that in. Those yearly expenses can be really surprising. And with a budget, we can plan for it the next time it happens so that that type of money does not detract from our goals or our necessary items and it doesn't put us into debt. From there, you should further break down each category into fixed or variable expenses. Fixed means monthly or reoccurring expenses that you have to pay that are always the same price, so the number doesn't change. This potentially includes rent, internet bills, Spotify, etc. While variable changes with your usage, so that's things like groceries and also your utilities. Variable expenses are usually easier to cut down when it comes to lowering your usage in many things. Here is where you can use the zero-based budgeting or the 50-30-20 rule. For zero-based budgeting, are you allocating all of your money into your different categories and goals at the end of the month? And for the 50-30-20 rule, how close are you to the benchmark for 50 for necessities, 30 for wants, and 20 for savings? Are you happy with the savings rate? Do you want to increase it? How do we get to a place where we feel balanced in our lives and the money is where we want it to be? The last step is to figure out your income minus expenses minus goals. If it's negative, then some things need to change. There are 3 big ways you can get to net positive. Either you increase your income, you lower your expenses, or you increase the time horizon for your goals. Increasing your income is basically just increasing how much money you take in every month. So that means through your main hustle and also your side gigs. Something else you might need to evaluate with increasing your income is, can you do it in the short term? Here's where most of the budgeting comes in with cutting your expenses. Take a look at your expenses and see if that aligns with what you want to be spending money on. Think about your goal for expenses that makes sense to you. Variable expenses are the easiest to start cutting out because it's really based on your usage. So these include things like eating out or your utility bills. For fixed expenses, it might be a bit harder to cut. For example, your rent. You might be bound by a lease or a mortgage if you own your house. You could try negotiating your bill or finding a cheaper alternative, but these require a little bit more effort and may not be immediately in your control. If you're spending $400 right now on eating out and you want to cut back to $75 a month, would you feel like that is realistic to do? Or do you think $150 per month is more manageable? One tip I have for cutting back on expenses is to do it slowly. Basically, the goal here is that one day you wake up and you realize that you're only spending $150 on eating out every month, and you didn't even realize it. The last thing I had mentioned was to increase your time horizon for your goals. While obviously this isn't ideal, but as you are cutting back expenses, you can add more money into your savings. While this isn't ideal, but as you are cutting down on your expenses, you can slowly increase the amount you contribute towards your goals. Now, if this value is positive, that's great. Where do you want your extra money to go? I would suggest saving before spending and also thinking about where you're holding your money. So like what type of account it's in. So now that you have your budget, how do you track your budget? I've definitely gone through a few types of budgeting tools, and there are so many apps out there that are really great for budgeting. I personally started out with Mint. I think they're really good for first-time budgeters. They have a lot of info and categories already, and you can set goals, track your income, and also your expenses. YNAB follows zero-based budgeting to a T, basically. It's reduced a lot of my guilt for spending. Or you can go back to the roots and do it on an Excel spreadsheet. When I first started my budget in middle school, I wrote down all of my expenses and all of the things that I spent it on in a notebook. Obviously, tech has come a long way so far, and I have graduated to also using a spreadsheet. So I still have my spreadsheet, but it's mainly because for YNAB, I use it to track how I'm doing in terms of all of my goals and my budget, while my spreadsheet really lets me sit down and take a look at what I am spending on. And it helps me go through every single expense that I am spending on and not just the overall picture of my accounts and my budget. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. After you have your first budget, make sure to follow it and track your expenses. We always want to be reevaluating our budget because it is dynamic. When you reevaluate, were there things you missed in your initial budget that you want to add in? Are all the amounts on there realistic? If you've been completely off about your budget, that's okay. I'll be putting in some tips and tricks at the end of this video. How to stick with a budget. My number one tip is don't try to change overnight. I felt really shackled by money before, and it was mostly because of my mentality of either I have money or I don't have money at that moment. So with this, if I could tell myself back then to just slowly decrease my spending for each category and just be more mindful of what I spend on, I think that would have really helped me a lot. The next one is really hard to stick to, I know, but don't think of credit cards as extra money to spend. I know it's really hard because with a debit card, if you swipe it and you don't have money, then you can't spend that money that you don't have. But for credit cards, it's really hard to do that because of your higher credit limit. So I would say that with a credit card, you should always be able to pay your balance in full at any moment in time. This is because they have extremely high interest rates, so if you miss out on paying on your full balance for 1 month, they'll charge you an exorbitant amount of money. If this requires too much self-control, there are 2 ways you can remedy this situation. Number 1, switch to a debit card. This way you don't think of your credit limit as a cap, and you're bound by the actual amount of money you have in your bank account. The more extreme version of using a debit card is switching to full-on cash. A lot of research has shown that cards actually desensitize you to how much money you are spending. For cash, you can also use the cash envelope stuffing method. This is where you allocate all of your money into different categories by using different envelopes for each. I'll include a few links to cash envelope wallets in the description down below. And my last tip for sticking to a budget is to give yourself room. The point is for money to work for you and not the other way around. What are some tips for saving on things that I've been spending too much money on? The first one is to find cheaper alternatives. Instead of eating out, what can you do to enjoy eating at home more often? If eating out is something that you really enjoy because you don't like to cook, I suggest doing pickup. With pickup, you save on tip and you also save on delivery fees. For me, I resorted to eating out when I really didn't want to cook, so I started using Freshly instead. Because we have Freshly at home, we only spent $75 on eating out this past month. On top of that, I took advantage of my credit card rewards. My Amex Gold offers $10 in Grubhub/Seamless credit every month, and so that along with pickup saved us a lot of money on eating out. Not to mention, they also have Uber and Uber Eats credits. It's also okay to spend time and money to explore things that might work for you. As an example, Eric and I love coffee. We love lattes, and lattes are our absolute splurge. Originally, we were using Nespresso pods because that was what worked for his parents. But because each Nespresso pod is around $1, we ended up trying different things. First, we went around the house and gathered all the instant coffee we could find, and we finished all of that. Then we tried drip, but before that, we used a tea strainer and coffee filters. From there, we realized we could just get ourselves a coffee machine, so we found this one on Amazon for $15, and it's been so helpful. Something else that I found to be useful is to automate my savings. With it being in a high-yield savings account, it just takes just a little bit more work for me to take that money out and use it, which does deter me from actually using that money. If impulse purchases are what's giving you a headache, then keep it in your shopping cart for at least 3 days before buying it. After the 3 days, you can reevaluate if you still like it or not, and if you still really want it, then you can go ahead and buy it. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier about the envelope method. Basically, you'll allocate how much money you'll need every month for different categories, and you'll take out that exact amount in cash. Like I mentioned before, using cash makes you actually feel the money leaving your wallet, while cards sometimes numb that pain. And this is something that I still have trouble with, but when it comes to actually spending the money that you save up for, don't be afraid to spend it. Money, at the end of the day, is just a tool, and it's just there for us to increase our quality of life. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you. Bye-bye.